Right. Okay, so this talk is a collaboration with Abeba Birhane and Frank Pascal, and we are currently writing together. So if you have any feedback that may help us improve our argument, we'd be happy to hear about it. Now, why do people think about robot rights? Well, the basic line of reasoning seems to be humans do a certain number of tasks, talking, eating, feeding, working. Robots are doing an increasing percentage of those tasks. Humans have rights, therefore robots should have rights. And if we grant ourselves rights, why not grant a sufficiently intelligent robot these rights too? This argument betrays a functionalist materialist commitment, so assuming that both robots and humans are physical, and the idea that autonomy is somehow caused by the functional organization of physical matter, we may want to avoid what is called species chauvinism. So why just give humans rights and not similarly physical autonomous systems that are not human? But we start from a completely different line of thought. We are concerned with the real world, where actual robots are deployed in relation to actual human beings. And from that point of view, we observe that the philosophical discussions are abstract fantasy discussions. And the problem is that these fantasies have led engineers building actual machines that go by the name of AI and robot, but which have real impact on real people in the real world. So we wish to focus on these real-world consequences instead of debating in the abstract, hypothetical scenarios. In what follows, we provide metaphysical, ethical, and legal arguments against robot rights. First of all, the robots that we think about don't exist. Future artificial general intelligence scenarios have been there all the way from the start in the 1940s, and they always project 30 to 50 years in the future, and they never come true. And yet these same stories keep dominating the discourse. This all-round friendly robot housekeeper is still not there. But meanwhile, Internet of Things is monitoring everything we do, sending our data to big tech companies. That is the reality. As Joseph Weizenbaum already said, the AI project was a fraud, and it played on the trusting instincts of people, and it still does. Secondly, we do not start from any neo-Cartesian reductionist idea of humans in the first place. We start from the idea that humans are inactive, self-sustaining, sense-making living beings who are always in a dynamic flux of endless becoming, as Di Paolo and colleagues call it. So from this perspective, humans and robots are only similar in the abstract sense of the word. In the concrete world that we live in, robots are always models created by humans within a reductionist understanding of ourselves. They are physically implemented in a human-constructed, maintained artifact, and then as an artifact they play a role in our human world. And that's it for robots. So these would be sort of two metaphysical arguments suggesting that the idea of robot rights makes little sense. But even if you do not share our philosophy, and even if you believe that in the future robots will indeed become machines like us, even so, let's be honest, it will take a very, very long time to go from Siri to anything approaching command or data, or even R2D2. Meanwhile, to have actual robot machines function properly requires an increasingly and radically datafied world. And this already means a direct assault on human autonomy and privacy, and this is happening right now. So this brings us to our ethical arguments. If we look at current AI and robotic systems, for example used in policy, decision-making, crime fighting, healthcare, and so on, we see that these systems perpetuate negative stereotypes, they disproportionately harm individuals and communities at the margins of society, they control, they surveil, exploit, dehumanize, and through performative prediction, they actually create a future that resembles the past. So they inherently are conservative and maintain the status quo. If the past was racist, and if we put it in a machine, it's going to be really difficult to get rid of racism. There are endless examples of this that my colleague Abeba Birhane is meticulously collecting. We don't have time, unfortunately, to go into all these details. But to illustrate the point, let's just say as one example that discussing The philosophical trolley problem in relation to autonomous cars may be fun exercise for the philosopher. But the real-world fact is actually that these cars do not even recognize black pedestrians. And that's the thing we should be talking about. And let's not forget, the backbone from which these systems are built is to a large extent human. It's humans who are doing the heavy lifting here. The ghost workers, the micro workers, the data labelers. Machine learning doesn't work with raw data. As Bainbridge says, the more complex a system, the more it needs human input and maintenance. These robots that help to, these humans, yeah, well, I call them robots, but these are humans that help to create this illusion of robot intelligence and autonomy. They never enter the discussion. And moreover, they are being exploited in the process. And we want to talk about those people. In the current climate, where the design and development and deployment of AI and robotic systems is controlled by powerful tech corporations, rights for robots amounts to more rights for tech corporations to control and surveil and dehumanize, minoritize, underpaid and underserved communities. And we see that very clearly when a company delivery robot roaming the streets is actually preventing literally a wheelchair user from getting safely onto the sidewalk. Like, whose rights do we want to protect here? Let us turn to this legal perspective. We feel that advocates of robot rights are actually too easily and naively turned to rights talk when there are actually many other dimensions of legal protection. Legal systems are not that simple. Marianne Glandon and Michael Sandel and others critique this overexpansion of rights talk. They say rights talk is actually very problematic. Would it be sense to use rights talk to protect robots and their activities? What about bot speech on Twitter and on Facebook? Would it be resolved by the right to communicate? What drones flying around in your garden? Would it be resolved by them appealing to the right to observation? Would claims for using space on sidewalks, as we just saw, would be resolved by the freedom of using the public space for these robots? What we see is that robot rights people want us to think about robots within a civil rights frame. Well, actually, we should look at it from a corporate rights frame. To see the difference, on the one hand, we have oppressed, minoritized groups invoking civil rights to empower themselves. So, for example, the Brown versus Board, famous American legal case. But on the other hand, we have also powerful entities, big corporations already owned by relatively privileged persons claiming independent rights via their owners. So we saw that in the Citizens United versus Federal Election Committee in the Supreme Court. Corporation won on the basis of the right to speak, which made it possible to give unlimited amounts of money to push the voice of certain politicians during an election campaign. You see, law is often concerned with finding the better analogy. And in our case, the corporate rights frame matches better than the civil rights frame. This is certainly not meant to say that corporate rights arguments will actually help robots. The corporate rights frame is a contested and morally troubling frame in and of itself. But we say that it's still more appropriate normative framework to talk about robot rights in law, and it's more appropriate than a civil rights frame that most robot rights people base their arguments on. When robots are concerned, legally speaking, it's actually more a matter of interest between people, not a question of two agents having each some inherent moral standing. There may be good reasons not to let persons destroy sidewalk robots or not to let government eliminate all bots from Twitter. But these involve the human interests of the robot owners rather than any rights of the tech itself. That doesn't make any sense. An interest framework also keeps technology in its place. It also prevents the creation of a legion of rights-bearing robots from upsetting the delicate balance of fundamental rights that are now protected under a rights regime. So in conclusion, first of all, no more science fiction, future fantasy data commander robot scenarios. And to summarize a little bit what we've talked about, we've shown some metaphysical, ethical and legal reasons for rejecting robot rights. And this picture of a robot as some kind of proto-oppressed human that needs to be liberated, like certain human groups have been liberated in the past, that's misleading and it's even offensive. It's offensive to the people in the past who've been struggling for emancipation, but it's also offensive to the many marginalized groups of people in society today that are still oppressed. And the cynical aspect of it is that increasingly it's robots that are being used to oppress people. Robots and other kinds of AI systems. And it's all to the benefit of other people, those in power. So it's the people in power who use technology to oppress certain groups. And that is where our concerns should lie. Thank you very much. And in the top right, you see some stuff that we already wrote, a new book by Frank that we really recommend. And yeah, we hope to get some good feedback from you. Thank you very much for listening.